All right, it is 11 o'clock in the great city of Berlin, and that means it is time for our new webinar titled A Human Rights Narrative, Additional Value for Your Company, Suppliers and Customers. My name is Katharina Stechl. I am the program manager of the Roundtable Human Rights and Tourism, and I will host today's webinar together with my colleague Yara Schreiber, who works in the background for a smooth technical process. We are very, very thankful to have two amazing speakers with us today. Those of you who attended our last webinar might jump to the conclusion that we kind of have a strict women's policy here. Again, that is just a pure coincidence. Nevertheless, I'm very thrilled to have two international experts with us today. So we have Kristin Hulaas Sunde, who is a freelancing communication specialist, copywriter and creative, who has over 25 years of experience in developing strategies and creative content for international charities and NGOs. And she also worked for Amnesty International, where she kind of developed the hope-based approach that she will share with us later in this webinar. And from deep down under, we have Natalie with us, who works as Chief People and Purpose Officer at Intrepid Be Open, the world's largest provider of adventure travel experience. And Natalie's current role is to lead purpose-driven activities that include the commitment to climate action, human rights, modern slavery, and animal and child welfare. Before we get to the speaker's input, let me explain the Roundtable Human Rights and Tourism a little bit for you, for those of you who don't know us yet. So the Roundtable Human Rights and Tourism is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was founded in 2012 as a nonprofit association, and we are the largest sector dialogue for human rights and tourism. We currently have 32 members from 6 countries, including travel associations, tour operators, multipliers such as institutions, universities, also, for example, ITB Berlin, foundations, civil societies, NGOs. Our membership is actually open to all tourism companies that commit themselves to the Roundtable principles and sign our voluntary commitments. So if you're also interested in a membership, please contact us. We're always very happy to get into the talk with that. And we see ourselves as an open dialogue platform for the exchange of knowledge and for mutual learning within the industry, and practices of good examples, and as a trustworthy network of tourism stakeholders, the Roundtable Human Rights and Tourism aims to support the industry in a demand-driven way and make a resumption of travel positive and sustainable for all stakeholders. That's a very tiny insight of the Roundtable Human Rights and Tourism. So let's shortly touch the housekeeping rules and the agenda of today's webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and the presentation and the recording will be available on the Roundtable website within a few days. All of you are muted by default. If you have any questions, please use the chat function. And even though we're happy to have all of you here, due to data protection, we are not allowed to use your data. So if you're interested in our offers, in our next webinars, because this webinar is part of a whole series around human rights and tourism, and we'll have a bunch of very interesting webinars coming up. So if you're interested, please make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. And you can also directly post your email address into the chat if you prefer that. And we have a little survey at the end of this webinar. We already post the link here in the chat as well. If you have time to fill that out, that would be very, very helpful for us. So to the schedule of today, you see again our two speakers here. Kristin will start with the benefits of a human rights narrative, how and why to create such a narrative, how to frame your messages, how to avoid pitfalls, and she'll explain the hope-based approach. And then we have Natalie Kidd as a good practice example from a huge tour operator, explaining a little bit of Intrepid's human rights narrative. All right, without any further ado, I would clear the stage for Kristin, who is here with us from the UK. Kristin, thank you so much for being here, and the stage is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here today and to meet so many people who are also interested in human rights. So a little bit about me. I am originally from Norway, but I have lived most of my career in the UK, where I've worked in the NGO and charity communication sector ever since I left journalism school, including for Save the Children and Amnesty International. And at Amnesty, I had the opportunity to lead on the communication about migration since 2014. And that included developing a new communication strategy for Amnesty's global refugee campaign, since which started in 2016, and which I think we all remember was quite a, should we say, a period of change for Europe. And that kind of period led us to formulate a new methodology for developing new positive narratives for talking about human rights. And we call this, as Katharina mentioned, the hope-based approach. And it's based on our own work on testing different approaches and running our own campaigns, and also learning from what other people do, and particularly from other experts in progressive communications. These days, I am an independent consultant, and I specialize in strategic comms and creative approaches to human rights and migration. So I'm here to talk about some simple shifts that we can all make to adapt to this challenging new environment that we live in. And to make this practically useful for you, I will introduce the basic elements of the hope-based approach, and I'll also try and give you some ideas throughout for how to start applying it to your own work. But my biggest challenge right now is to try and share my screen. So it's not really, Katharina, it's not giving me the option of sharing. It worked earlier. Aha, here we go. Yes? Hooray. Right, okay. So, what is a narrative? I thought I'd just cover that because I'm not sure, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about this. So at the very basic level, a narrative is a story that we tell ourselves consistently over time. We tell stories about ourselves, about other people, about our business activities, about the society that we live in, and about the world in general. And we do this all the time because human brains love storytelling. Our brains are hardwired to use stories as a way to process all the complex things that go on around us all the time. And it helps us make sense of them. And at all times, there are competing narratives. For example, like how history is taught. It's taught differently in different countries from different perspectives. The heroes and the victims are different. The winners and the losers are different because the narratives are different. And narratives are made up of messages, events, stories that we receive and create and repeat over time whenever we communicate. For example, for anything from talking to your colleagues and your business connections, what you say on your social media accounts, on your websites, and in what you do and how you express yourself. And we decide what to focus on, we decide what to ignore, we decide what to explore in more depth, and we choose words, images, and metaphors that help us to paint pictures of our narratives in people's minds. And in terms of a practical tip, a narrative is a really good starting point for any communications and marketing strategy. Because if you can write a couple of paragraphs about what your story is, then that will help you articulate that story over time and reflect it in your communications outputs. And if everybody knows that this is your narrative internally, they will be able to help you to tell that story in their daily work too. So to create a narrative that's grounded in hope, it means framing your own view of the world through the lens of respect for human rights. And as mentioned, the hope-based approach sprung out of our work at Amnesty International, where I had the task of developing a new communication strategy for a campaign asking the rich countries of the world to receive more refugees at the time that Brexit happened, Trump happened, and over 1 million people had just walked to Europe. So it was a very, very challenging time. And we found ourselves surrounded by a deeply negative authoritarian narrative, especially surrounding people who were seeking asylum. And when we started to develop our strategy, we found that, like many progressive organizations, we were investing a lot of energy in constantly being against what other people were saying. And that forced us into a position where we were not just constantly reacting to our opponents and repeating their messages, we were forgetting to make a positive case for what we stand for and the world that we want to build, as in this example. So despite our best intentions, we found that we were often reporting on and communicating about refugees as in the same way as, for example, the UK Independence Party, which is a right-wing party in the UK that had a platform that was very strongly anti-immigration. And then you can see the screenshot from Amnesty's own website, and it made us realize that we were using the same kind of imagery. And we were also using the same kind of language like migration flow and refugee burden, which meant that we were invoking the same negative associations and fear, and this idea that society was at breaking point and that we were facing an invasion. And that was an exhausting way to communicate, not just for us as human rights activists, but also for the people that we were trying to engage. Our audiences, because as one colleague I know says, people have 101 problems of their own and they really don't need yours. And in fact, the audience research that we did for our campaign told us that in order to engage more people and get people on board with our campaign, people wanted to feel a personal human connection with refugees. They wanted us to talk about the values that we share across the boundaries that exist between people, and also to know what the solutions could look like and how they could help us make those solutions become a reality. And also it made us realize that what you fight, you feed. If you're constantly trapped opposing somebody else's narrative, you're spending less time building something new and something better. So hope-based communication in a nutshell is about looking at your work and your goals through a different lens and asking yourself what you want people to feel, think, and do when they hear about you and your business and your commitment to human rights. And the methodology is based on solid research about how our brains work and how human beings receive and process information. So these are the 5 simple steps, and I'm going to summarize them at the end. So don't worry if you can't keep track. And little things that we can do to start applying this method. So this is a photo which I love, which is of 2 young women that I had the opportunity to work with for a couple of years. And it's taken from a publication called The Lily, which is part of Washington Post. And it shows a young woman called Taibe Abasi hugging her best friend Ingjerd in Norway. And we worked closely with them and their friends and their wider community for 2 years, supporting their grassroots campaign to stop Taibe and her family being deported to Afghanistan. And this represents the first hope-based shift, which is moving from fear to hope. So this campaign represented a huge shift from our old communication approach, which I showed you before on the previous slide. Because traditionally we had tried to use fear to create outrage, but that led to us often triggering more fear instead of creating something positive. And it is very easy to trigger a fear response in humans because our brains are very old and their main job is to keep us alive. So when we feel fear and we perceive a threat, it triggers a response in our brains, in the oldest parts of our brains, which controls basic functions like breathing, but also strong emotions like fear and anger, and the fight or flight or freeze response. And fear also releases the stress hormone cortisol that blocks out our rational thought. And our rational thought lives in what we can call the upstairs brain, alongside feelings like abundance and joy. And that's also where empathy lives. And so we found that we realized that to bring people with us, we needed to avoid triggering their fears and getting them into survival mode, because we're constantly scanning for threats. That's how we are made. And instead, we try to bypass that reaction and appeal to people's rational brains and their empathy. And the key to doing that is hope and positive feelings like joy, humor, compassion. And so using this kind of storytelling helped us to completely reframe our narrative about EU governments breaking international law by deporting Afghans to one of the world's most dangerous countries. Which was a very sad story, of course, but because we told it in the framework of their friendship and their community's fight to keep these friends together, we got 300,000 signatures, and we got much needed media and social media focus on the situation for Afghans in Europe generally. And we also helped Taibei and her family to stay in Norway. So instead of triggering negative feelings, we were able to bring people together around the hope that together we could actually make a difference and make things better. So one thing to ask yourself when you are communicating is, what positive emotion can you help people feel when you tell them about your business, your purpose, or a new campaign? Second shift. So this is touching on how to talk about human rights without being a deterrent. And this shift is about focusing on what you're for instead of what you're against. So George Lakoff and Anat Osorio, they are prominent experts on message framing and cognitive linguistics. And George Lakoff is best known for his thesis that our lives are significantly influenced by the metaphors we use to explain complex things that happen all around us. And when we use words, we always trigger mental templates and associations in people's minds. So his thesis at the very basic level is that if you tell someone not to think of an elephant is exactly what we will picture in our minds. And at Amnesty, we worked closely with Anat on how to use language differently to make the case for asylum, but also for human rights more effectively. And she's written extensively on this and done important studies, including for the Open Society Foundation, on how we use language and metaphors to frame arguments in favor of human rights. It's called The Brilliant Way to Live Our Lives. Some of you might be aware of her research already, but we can also share links after the workshop. But for now, the key point is how important language is when we communicate. So this, you might recognize some of these. This is classic human rights campaigning, and also on other issues. I've included some that aren't on human rights. And it's just to show that this is something we do a lot, but unfortunately it often achieves the opposite of what we wanted to, because Anat, among others, have found in their research that when we use negations, so when we say that something is not something, the word not doesn't register in people's brains. So instead our brains start to associate the two other words, like linking asylum seekers with terrorism or linking abortion with crime. And research has shown that people increasingly see human rights as something that is used to defend criminals. And social listening has shown that the main emotion associated with human rights in people's conversations is despair, which is clearly not what we want. So what if, instead of saying what something isn't and framing our work around what we want to fight, we focus on what something is and paint a picture of the world we want to build? People at opposite sides of the political spectrum often frame their messages and arguments in a positive way, like this: based on the same values, like our vision for a better society and our power to create something better together. Donald Trump did it with Make America Great Again. Barack Obama did it with Yes, We Can. And the reason they do it is because evoking a positive vision of the future is an effective way to bring people together. And we can do the same. if we focus on articulating what we stand for, including our values. So most values, like for example, justice, freedom, equality, are contested concepts, which means that they mean different things to different people. So if it's up to us to frame our messages clearly, to help people understand what our values mean to us, so that we can get through to people. So in terms of tips and ideas for you, I would ask myself, what belief is it that drives you and your business? And what values are you asking people to buy into when they work with you or buy your services? And how can your human rights focused business purpose make things better for people? If you can articulate that, then you have a great chance of bringing people with a similar mindset with you. This is a successful campaign in Ireland for marriage equality. And so this is an example of how to use values successfully. So they targeted older heterosexual men on a platform of love, equality, fairness, generosity, and inclusivity, and they won. So this also represents the third shift of hope-based communication. There are only 5, don't worry. To show solutions and not just problems. So to feel a connection with your purpose, people need to believe that what you're presenting is a real alternative to today's problems. So, but the difficulty is that showing how positive change can happen in the future actually demands a lot of creativity and effort. It's harder than documenting the problems that you're trying to address. But we need to be as good at celebrating the things we want to see in the world as we are at criticizing the things we want to stop. So we can find new creative ways to show how we're part of promoting values like tolerance, kindness, humanity, which is really just another way of expressing solidarity. So the challenge is to find the language and the stories and the images that make people, including your employees, your business contacts, your suppliers, and your customers, see how your focus on human rights and tourism works in practice, and make them want to go on that journey with you. Because if you can successfully communicate how things should be, you don't just make it possible, you make it inevitable. So ask yourself, what do you want to see happen as a result of your business practices? And how could your solution work in practice? And how can people picture it in their heads? You could use a metaphor, for example, that describes what you're trying to, the world you're trying to create through your work. So I jumped ahead of my slides a little bit, sorry about that. This is about shift 4. We're nearly at the end now. This is about focusing on opportunities instead of on threats. Because instead of making people feel guilty or at risk, we can show them how change can happen and give them a chance to be part of something special. Because people want to connect with each other and they want to be part of something successful. And they want to be, we like being in a community with other people who share our values and our beliefs. And we've seen this with so many successful movements, like this one, Fridays for Future, to the US pro-life movement that uses community building very successfully in its grassroots campaigning, to, on the other side of the spectrum, the pro-choice Green Wave campaign in Argentina, which used the color green to bring people out on the streets to campaign for the right to abortion. So reaching people on an emotional level and showing them how your business is part of the solution will make them passionate about you. It gives them an opportunity to connect with you and your purpose. So when you are working on your communications, ask yourself if you have shown people the opportunity for change that your business activities bring, and how human rights can make things better for the people that you're working with. And it's also important, this is not about pretending that there aren't problems, because of course there are problems that we try to address. But often we forget to show why the problems happen. So what causes them, what policies, people, institutions are causing the problem, because that makes it easier to also talk about in concrete terms how we can fix those problems, and how through suppliers, through business partners and customers, everyone can be part of building the solution together with you. And then the final shift is, and I have borrowed this from Intrepid Travel. I hope you don't mind, Natalie, this lovely picture here. This is the final shift of hope-based communication is showing everyday human heroes instead of powerless victims. because particularly in the NGO, human rights sector, charity sector, we can fall into the trap of presenting people who are suffering as victims. But instead, what we realized was that it's so important to show the people who need social change most, who need responsible business practices, etc. And the people who are fighting to make that change with them, the heroes of our stories and our new narratives. And I don't mean elevated, glorified heroes here or winners who are somehow better than ordinary human beings. I mean ordinary people who are doing what they can to make things better. So because that helps us to avoid accidentally dehumanizing the people we want to help by portraying them as passive. And instead we can celebrate our common humanity and present ourselves as equals, as in that picture I showed you of the two girls hugging, best friends, because it's something to relate to. So, and it models behavior. So I really like this picture because it shows tourists sitting down to dine with their hosts in the local style. And it illustrates beautifully that this kind of connection is not just possible, but it's actually enjoyable. And it's something that everyone can do. So things to ask yourself is, when you tell stories about your work, who are you inviting your audience to side with? Are you presenting people as passive and powerless? And if you are, could you switch to showing how they are powerful and active participants instead? And also the people that you are presenting in your storytelling, are they relatable? Is it clear why they are there? Have you expressed their hopes and their values? And also think about your messengers. Who is the most effective messenger that you can use to reach people with your business purpose? So those are the 5 simple shifts. I know there's a lot there to digest, but I hope you found it useful and interesting as a starting point for telling new kinds of stories and creating a narrative that promotes human rights as a positive way to live your life and do business. So just to sum up, hope-based communication acts on the principle that we should be focused on building the world we want, setting our own agenda with our own values, our own goals and our own mission. And it's a simple, pragmatic formula for telling stories that can contribute. So this has to be told over time, repeatedly. But if you do that, then it can contribute to long-term changes in ideas and attitudes and behavior. By making these 5 simple shifts, I use them all the time, and I find it also a very much more positive and inspiring and uplifting way of working, because I'm focusing on what I can do and what's actually good and possible, instead of all the things that are wrong in the world. But to do this, you need people across your organization to play their part. So this isn't just about communications, it cuts across everything you do and how you talk about your business and how you present your work. But I'm a firm believer that doing this can change people's perceptions of human rights as a tool for making things better. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristin, for this broad overview. I think what you said is suitable for a lot of companies. I mean, even though some strings are not directly connected to the tourism industry, but anyhow, all of what you said has a great influence on how we create our stories. I particularly like when you said that everybody wants to be part of something, because this is exactly where your starting point is in really making your customers and the people that work for you and also suppliers see the greater good behind what you're doing. As we do not have any questions from the audience so far, I would be interested when, let's say you are a small or medium-sized tour operator who probably hasn't dealt so far with a human rights narrative. Where do you see, Kristin, a starting point? I mean, of course, the starting point could also be participating in webinars like this, but where would you see a starting point for tour operators to work on that narrative?
I think having a discussion in your business, because this all starts with you and what you believe in as a business and what your values are and how you articulate those. So I would think about why do you want to reflect human rights in your business practices, and then write a little narrative, write your own little story. You can change it anytime you want, but it just gives you a starting point. What is your story? What is the story of your business? What are you trying to create? And how are you contributing to making that purpose real? And then how can people be part of that vision with you? Because then that will help you to start telling a positive story about how your business is part of something bigger, and how by buying travel with you, people can help become part of that community. So think of yourself as part of a community, and then bringing more people into that community.
All right, thank you for that answer. As we do not have any questions from the audience so far, I would say let's move on a little, let people digest what you just said, and let's break all of what you said down to a tourism level. So we have Natalie with us, as mentioned, Chief of People and Purpose Manager at Intrepid Travel. Natalie has a lot of experience in working for Intrepid. She has also done destination management before that, has a Master of Business and Technology, and is here to report from Intrepid's human rights narrative. Natalie, thank you for extending your working hours, and the stage is yours.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks, Kristin. I found that really, really interesting. I will now share my screen. So hopefully you can see that. Am I getting a nod from Katharina? Have you got my screen?
Yeah, maybe you can turn on the full screen mode.
Yeah. Here we go. Okay. Great. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. I'm coming to you today from Melbourne, Australia, where Intrepid Travel's head office is. I actually live in Sydney, but I had that very unusual experience this morning of getting on a plane and coming to Melbourne, which is something I haven't been able to do for quite a long time. I joined Intrepid 15 years ago, initially setting up our offices in Vietnam and Cambodia, and then have spent pretty much the last 13 years developing our destination management companies all around the world. We've now got 23 of them. So I've been really fortunate to work in many different countries of the world with many different teams. And it was just last year I moved into my current role of Chief People and Purpose Officer, which means I oversee our strategies and policies and processes in relation to people, and also to purpose, which is our term for sustainability. And both of those areas, people and purpose, really need to be embedded entirely across our whole business, because they both are really, really core to what we do. And so following on from Kristin's presentation, I'm going to talk about a few of our examples, show you a few of the things that we do and have done in relation to human rights, and also communicating that. Before I begin or go any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I'm currently on the land of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to their elders past, present and future. This process of acknowledging country is something that we've started doing at Intrepid for any presentation, major gathering or meeting that we host from Australia, even though all of our audience tonight is in Europe, because I'm on the lands of Australia, I acknowledge the country. This is one form of communication that we've started using really frequently. It is a way in Australia that we give recognition and respect to our Indigenous First Nations people. As a travel company, it is often the culture and ways of Indigenous people around the world that our travellers are most interested in engaging with. So respecting and protecting those people is a really key element of our sustainability practice and an evolving area in human rights. For those of you not familiar with Intrepid, we were founded back in 1989 by two friends based out of Melbourne, and that's still where our headquarters are. But we've grown to become the world's largest adventure travel company. We take people to travel on all continents of the world, and travelling a local way in small groups with a local leader, staying in local accommodation, eating in neighbourhood restaurants, and really trying to engage with local people and local communities. This approach is to ensure a more authentic experience for our travellers, but also to try and keep more money generated through travel in the places that it belongs, in the pockets of local people. So we call our approach to travel sustainable experience-rich travel. Before the pandemic, Intrepid operated over 1,000 different itineraries in 130 countries around the world, everywhere from Antarctica to Vietnam to Morocco and everywhere in between. Since 2018, we've been the world's largest certified travel B Corp, which is a new form of business that legally requires companies to balance purpose and profit. Our vision is to change the way we see the world. This means we want people who travel with us to travel responsibly, to make real connections, to understand, to open their view, and to see the similarities between people, and really get to share experiences and learn from the communities who live in the countries we take them to. As a business, we are very much a values-based organisation with a strong company culture. We put purpose at the heart of everything we do, and it's very key to our strategy. So rather than saying we want to be the best travel company in the world, we talk about wanting to be the best travel company for the world. So in believing that, we are very dedicated to a travel philosophy of ensuring our business promotes the fulfillment of human rights by maximising social, environmental, economic benefits to local people. Of course, some of the destinations we go to are challenging. Some of them have poor human rights records, but we really do believe that tourism can be a force for good, and by promoting two-way understanding, communication and connection, we can make improvements to the world. But today we're talking about communication, but I think what's very important for us is to start off with the fact that change starts from within. And here are some lovely members of our team. This is our Moroccan, some of the women from our Moroccan team. But starting from within is what we always look to. So as a B Corp, as I mentioned, we're legally required to consider all of our stakeholders, not just our shareholders, even though many of our shareholders are staff, but we have to legally consider the needs of stakeholders beyond shareholders. So that is staff, customers, communities, supply chain, and also the environment. Before we come to talking to our customers or our supply chain, we need to be clear that we're actually taking action. We know what we're doing. As a purpose-led business, we want to tell stories about the things that we're doing, about our purpose and our sustainability, but we really want to make sure that we are doing the actions necessarily internally before we start talking about them. At that point though, communicating externally really helps to make a much bigger impact. So talking to our supply chain, talking to our staff, talking to our customers, and opening the minds of our customers, and then also playing an advocacy role within the industry. So many of the things we do that we believe are the right thing to do, we don't want to do it alone. We want to share our ideas and have other people within the industry join us to make the world a better place. Over the years, we've advocated on issues such as climate action, animal welfare, and more specifically on today's topic, child protection, gender equality, supporting Indigenous communities, which we do through our Reconciliation Action Plan, and also promoting products that promote cultural heritage and learning. In terms of communicating, there are probably 4 levels at which we communicate about these types of things. One is internal to our staff, our leaders, crew, and suppliers. Secondly, externally, talking about a business view. And one of the ways we do this is with our annual integrated report, which is a report available for download from our website that we share with staff and with external contacts all over the world, which is our transparent record of our success and our challenges and our failures and our results, both financial and non-financial. And we prepare that every year to create a record of what we have done as a business. Our third area of communication is advocacy, where we will try and get people to join us on various journeys. And finally, of course, inspiration for our customers and our travellers. So one example that was very pertinent last year, of course, was around the timing of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I think it's a good example to show some of the things that we believe in terms of when we do communicate externally. So I'm sure we've all seen the black tiles that businesses went and posted on Instagram in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. At the time, our public relations teams, our marketing people really wanted us to do the same. But before we would do that, we really came back to this focus on change starts from within. And we spent a number of days working out not just how we'd support the movement in terms of social media, but what concrete actions, what appropriate actions we could take in a reasonable time frame that would support the movement. So we debated that at an executive level, we sent it out to our teams, we got feedback around the business, and only then did we go external and join the trend in terms of the social media posts. But what we actually did was take it a step further and post what our commitments were. And there were 4 commitments we came up with at that time. We made sure we posted all of those publicly to hold us to account. And we will now be reporting on those in our integrated report that reflects on everything that we did in 2020. We will be reporting back on those 4 public commitments that we made. With many of these situations, of course, going public on a topic like this, we did get overwhelming positive support from people. But even so, we had challenges, and you always will have challenges, I think, when you go public with things like that. And that's okay. That gave us, being challenged gives us an opportunity to go further, to reflect on ourselves and to learn more. Another area where we've been quite active over the years is advocating for child protection. Not all that long ago, visiting an orphanage or a classroom in a developing country was a normalised part of tourism. 15 years ago, when I lived in Vietnam and worked in Cambodia, visiting orphanages was unfortunately quite common. More than 8 million children live in orphanages or residential care, despite the fact that they've actually got at least one living relative. So being in a destination where we knew this was a risk we identified it as an area where we felt we had to do more. So we'd already started training our staff on child protection, but we wanted to think what else we could do. So we would train our staff, our leaders, our crew to be aware of child exploitation. We would get them to talk and identify the risk to our travellers. But again, we wanted to take it further. So in 2015, we engaged with a group called Rethink Orphanages, which is a cross-sectional network that aims to prevent unnecessary institutionalisation of children. And we wanted to lend our voice to the issue, particularly in the tourism sector, and we banned orphanage tourism for ourselves. We went through the internal process of training everybody why that was the case, training our teams as to how to talk to customers who might still want to have those experiences and could see that other tour operators were still offering those experiences. We then came up with other ways to communicate with our future customers, such as child protection tips, and shared those with other companies as well, so that we could, again, get other people to follow in our footsteps. We continued the advocacy, and particularly working with Rethink Orphanages, we actually lobbied to make sure that orphanage tourism was included in the Modern Slavery Act in Australia. So it is now illegal for operators to include it in their supply chain. And so this was the way that, addressing a particular area, we looked at the kind of practical steps we could take, the practical communications we could give to our customers, but also the role of advocacy and how we could actually make an impact in our industry. While we've done a lot of different things over the years, we always still need to do more. And of course, now there is modern slavery acts that have been put into law in a number of different countries. And as we look at that, we learn more and we see more ways that we can make an impact. But again, rather than just ticking a box and going out and talking about it externally, we need to do the work internally first. Then we want to take it to our supply chain and work with our supply chain more. We believe in doing so, that will then give us more stories, more opportunities to talk to, that we can then start to share with our customers and take further to continue evolving. As part of the process that we're going through in terms of modern slavery, we have worked with an external consultant who we do a bit of work with from time to time and got them to assess our risks, them to assess where we are and provide us with a roadmap. And actually they felt that we were doing really well. A lot of businesses, they said, were really just starting to emerge in this area, but they really felt that we were a stage beyond that. We were starting to evolve in our response to modern slavery, but we really want to progress over the coming years from evolving to excelling in this area. And as we go and as we learn and as we integrate with people in our supply chains and in our destinations, we're sure there are going to be stories that are going to come up that we then really want to share more broadly, both within the industry and with our travellers, to understand how they can make an impact as they travel and how they can help us change the way we see the world and use travel as a force for good. I dearly wanted to share with you, to close, a little video that our team has just posted on social media. I think it was on Friday, so about 5 days ago, which is kind of building on some of what Kristin was showing. We've released a number of little videos that we call Be Intrepid, and then typically have another tagline. And our latest one is called Be Intrepid, Be Open. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the tech working well enough to show you today, but I will post a link to it in the chat function. It's only 2 minutes long, but it shows you one person's view of going on an experience through Iran and how they felt about being open and connecting. So I'll pop that in the chat if you're interested in seeing how we actually kind of communicate and try and create that inspiration for our customers. And also address some of these more difficult areas. So, oops, I will leave it there. Hand back to Katharina.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for that very interesting insight of Intrepid's approach. And I really hope that people participating today can also identify with what you said, and maybe also have already, I'm sure that a lot of our participants already had started that process. So I actually have two questions for you, because I mean, those of you who attended our first webinar might also see like a connection of dots here. Our first webinar in this series was called Encounters at Eye Level, how to tackle racism in the tourism industry. And of course, the whole Black Lives Matter movement took a huge part in that webinar. So I was wondering, did you have any policies regarding racism in place before the Black Lives Matter movement, or did you already see that as a starting point? And was it also your approach to, as you said, hold yourself accountable, also in the sense of having that external perspective directly then looking at you and saying, okay, we will hold you accountable for what you continue to do after the big wave of the movement? So that would be my first question.
Yes, we already had some policies in place, and we have a human rights policy that, you know, talks about diversity and access. We have codes of conduct and that type of thing, which would allude to being inclusive and giving everybody opportunity. In terms of our onboarding and our compliance training, we already had diversity training and talk about the importance of diversity, the benefits for business of diversity, be it gender, be it ethnicity, be it sexual orientation, all of those different things we already had training on. We probably hadn't taken it as far as anti-racism. So I think in looking at the Black Lives Matter movement, it let us step back and say, well, you know, yeah, we're pretty good. We already do a lot of things, but what else can we do? And I personally took a real interest in it. So we made 4 different commitments. One of those was to introduce mandatory anti-racism training for all staff. And I took a real interest in that myself. We had a number of options of things we could have kind of purchased from other providers, but we really wanted something that addressed the need for all of our staff, whether they were in North America, Australia. Our second biggest office is in Sri Lanka, where there are different issues of diversity, in Southeast Asia or in Latin America. So we really wanted something that met everybody's needs. And so we put that in place. In terms of having the public commitment, because I was going into it in quite a lot of detail, it took a bit longer to put together than we had first imagined. But we were very focused. I think we'd set ourselves publicly a deadline of September, and it already got to September, and the CEO was, you said September, out there it says September, you've got to meet September. You know, we could have let it slip by a month, but because we'd committed publicly, we really had to stand by that. And, you know, we did make sure that we had met. It's an ongoing process. We haven't finished the process, but we did meet the 4 commitments that we had made as we had posted them. But it's still something we're continuing to evolve this year.
Okay, I think we have time for a last question. So I would be interested in, I mean, you said that you also deal in countries who have a difficult human rights situation. And I would be really interested, like what challenges you faced when really talking, for example, with all the policies that you already have in place that might also be a little bit threatening for local stakeholders. And what challenges did you experience when, for example, talking to local stakeholders, and how maybe can you also take the fear away from people to say, I'm feared to talk about human rights?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a challenging question, because we have teams. We have a team in Beijing who look after China. We have a team in Yangon who, of course, we are struggling to communicate with at the moment. There are lots of destinations where human rights is a very difficult topic, and potentially one that I might have myself or some of my other colleagues will have more exposure, more access to media than some of the teams in countries where it's a little bit more difficult and they won't have that access. So you need to be very cognizant of it. I think one of the first challenges and one of the first questions comes from the general public in terms of why are you in these countries, should you go to these countries? But as I said earlier, I really believe that connecting people, enabling people to share experiences with real people, grassroots organisations, as long as you can do it without all the money going through to the government or difficult regimes, as long as you can allow that natural connection, I think there is a benefit in most cases. So that's kind of the first question, but the ethics of going into these countries. But we think there is benefit to be had there. When you're talking to the local staff, you've got to be aware that they might have heard different things to what people outside of the country hear. Very much the case in Myanmar, also the case in Beijing. That's kind of why I picked those two examples. The perspective of the local staff might be quite different to what we have, and we've got to be careful about that. I think they're often aware that their perception might not be as broad as the perception of other people as well, and they want to understand people who are coming into their countries. But it's just really about being aware, being respectful, because at the end of the day, they're great team members. They're as passionate about our business as we are. They're, not making these decisions or policies that we might disagree with. So definitely showing them respect is important. But yes, it's challenging. But through our company policies, this came up through the Black Lives Matter movement as well. For a number of our staff, we're just so proud that we were taking the issue seriously. I think on human rights, it's certainly this whole purpose agenda that we have. We do it because we believe it's the right thing to do, but it absolutely resonates with our staff. It's one of the main reasons why our staff are as engaged as they are. And it's also something that really resonates with our customers and travellers as well. So I don't know that that's a full answer, because I don't know that there is a definitive answer as to how you deal with it, but just trying to take small steps and make a difference. If we can all make just that little bit of a difference, then it pushes things forward.
Thank you very much for that very detailed and very good answer, in my opinion. In order to finish on time, we have a last question from the audience, but in order to finish on time, I would shift that question to our little debriefing time after the webinar, and first officially close for those who need to leave on time. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for being here. I would like to thank our amazing speakers for sharing their input. Once again, I would like to invite you to register to our newsletter, to engage with us Whether you're a member or not, engage with the Roundtable, visit our website, contact us for also membership requests for any human rights issues that you might face. You would also do us a great favor with evaluating today's webinar. And of course, we will also participate in the ITB Berlin Now, which is happening from the 9th to the 12th of March. We will also post a guest voucher in the chat function where you can visit our brand card, and of course for all the exhibitors. We are there the whole time. Make sure to engage with us. We would love to get in contact with you. Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Natalie, for your great expertise. Thank you for staying up late, Natalie. Thank you, Kristin. And for those of you who have any questions left and posted them in the chat, please just make sure to stay a little while so we can answer them properly. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who have still unanswered questions, the first one is from Julia. And her question is, does Intrepid Travel engage in specific activities in the communities you visit, or mostly promote advocacy? So she means that, for example, you especially mentioned child labor and how to work and raise awareness about it. But how do we engage on the field with the phenomenon, and how do you plan to actually help the communities practically, considering in many societies having children working is unfortunately essential for the whole family. So yeah, how do you engage there?
Yeah, it's this is a really challenging one, and I don't know if there is a right answer to it. You know, we've debated the policies within Intrepid. So Intrepid Travel is the business. We also have a philanthropic foundation, Intrepid Foundation, that supports a number of organisations that are there to different types of organisations in different countries, but organisations that try to assist in stopping exploitation of children, taking people who've been in orphanages and trying to develop them and give them life skills to kind of get back on their feet. So from that philanthropic perspective, we do support a range of different foundations. So they're the experts in taking the action, but through gaining visibility through our customers and through grants that we offer, we kind of support them in that manner. We've talked about, you know, there's one particular meeting I recall in Cambodia where we were saying, now we don't want people giving to children when children are working. And one of our tour leaders said, but I was one of those children. I can, you know, so they've come from that background as well. So it's certainly difficult, but I think partnering with NGOs who are doing work is probably the key area. But, you know, we've been doing child safe training and sharing that around our organisation and our tour leaders and crew. So it's a range of different things that we do, but probably the biggest impact would be through our foundation in providing support.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a final question from Roland asking also Natalie, how do you analyze the risk for your business and how do you assess the impact? What kind of tools do you use?
So we do a lot of work in terms of risk. So risk assessments, which will cover everything from, you know, natural disasters, which will have an impact to us. So we do a lot of work on risk assessment and then trying to mitigate risk. We look at risk by destination. Of course, it's different risks in different destinations. Measuring impact is probably even more difficult and something we've been doing a lot of work on. In fact, I was in a 3-hour session today looking at how we better measure our impact in terms of, you know, lives positively impacted. We do a range of different reporting on that. For people who are interested, you can download the Intrepid Travel. If you just Google Intrepid Travel Integrated Report, within that you'll see some of the different ways we kind of report back on the impacts that we've made, and also some of the risks that we highlight.
Wonderful. I think all of the questions from the audience have been answered. I'm looking also to Yara if there's anything left. All right, perfect. Then I would also officially close the debriefing. Thank you for those of you who decided to stay. Check out all the links that we posted in the chat. Look at our website. Once again, thank you for that broad international expertise that we have with us today. And I wish all of you a very good working week and hope to see you again for our next webinar.